This week on Motor Week, Ginny Buckley cruises in the Cadillac Seville, Ian Royle takes the Mercedes A-Class for a drive, and Richard Hammond is in the Outback with the Legacy.
Now, we may share the same language as our friends across the Atlantic, and we've certainly inherited their love of fast food, but one thing we can't quite agree on is their taste in cars. Why? Well, just take a look at their roads and then remind yourself what ours are like. Yes, in Europe we love nothing better than to chuck a car around a set of thrilling bends, whilst in the States you have roads that stretch to infinity in a very straight line. And let's not forget the population with a taste for luxury on wheels. And those are the points you need to bear in mind when you weigh up the Cadillac Seville. Now, this is America's best-selling luxury car, and it's recently been introduced to our shores in, I might add, right-hand drive form. The very name Cadillac, of course, conjures up images of those huge fin-tailed gas guzzlers from the late 50s, all American cars. And the Cadillac Seville is without doubt an all-American affair. So GM have smoothed the edges off the Seville and got rid of the chrome overload. In fact, if it wasn't for the grille here on the front, you could almost be in, dare I say it, the Saab 9.5. But none of that can take away from the fact that this is an American car. You can tell the minute you get inside. There are loads of cubby holes and compartments everywhere. There are just dozens and dozens of fiddly little switches, and the wood and the leather just add to that old colonial ambience. But those are just the more obvious touches. Let me take you through some of my favourites. I mean, have you ever seen a waste paper basket on a car? And if you're motoring through one of those dodgy American cities, then you'll like the way that the doors lock automatically when you go from park to drive. And what about the seats that make the Seville resemble a sofa on wheels? Not only do they electrically adjust in every way imaginable, but they also work out your weight and your size, and then inflate or deflate little pockets of air inside the seats to make it even more comfortable. What will they think of next? This is the STS model, and it's the only one available in the UK. And although it's supposed to have a harder, more European feel, Cadillac simply haven't gone far enough with it. Or maybe that's that they just couldn't go far enough with it. In fact, it's only when you get the Cadillac onto familiar territory, a long stretch of road, that it really starts to feel at home. And then you can relax, slip it into cruise control, and sink into your electrically adjustable seats. Oh yes, the Cadillac Seville can cruise in much the same way that the QE2 cruises. You simply drift along in air-conditioned opulence and splendour, your every whim catered for. Unless you're a passenger sitting in the back. Now, I really don't think there's enough room back here for a car in this class. Now, it's okay for me, but I am quite small, but you get a couple of large blokes in the back here and they'd have no chance. So I've got a tip for you if you're planning on buying this Seville and being chauffeur driven. Make sure you hire a very small chauffeur. That way it'll give you plenty of room in the back. Drive on please, small chauffeur. It's an absolutely huge North Star V8, 32 valves, 4.6 litres, producing 301 brake horsepower. Obviously an engine designed for a country where petrol costs just a couple of cents a gallon. Now, it may seem like I'm being picky, but I reckon there are plenty of far better designed, more practical and definitely more stylish cars that I could buy for my 40 grand. You heard me right, I did say 40 grand. Somehow I don't think that the German giants will be losing much sleep over this competitor.
This car I'm driving is unique, certainly unique as far as its manufacturer is concerned, which up until now had been the producer of largest luxury cars. Not to say that this car isn't luxurious. If David Beckham thought that he got a rough ride after his sending off in the World Cup, it was nothing compared to the hounding that this car received from the world's media after it was tripped up by the Swedes and fell over. And this is the all-new, all-revised Mercedes A-Class, which has finally arrived on our shores. The tripping up by the Swedes was, of course, the now infamous Elk test conducted by a group of motoring writers from a Swedish magazine. It involves a sudden and violent manoeuvre to avoid an object. What happened next is motoring folklore. The A-Class lost stability and over it went. Now, at that time, Mercedes hadn't started production of right-hand drive cars, so there were none in this country, but it led Mercedes to a complete halt of A-Class production until a solution was devised. And what they've come up with here is probably the safest small car, if not the safest car ever built. Mercedes spent £1 billion developing the radical A-Class, a Mercedes for the masses at a price that they can afford. And as you can see, there is nothing like it on the road today. It is so different. The Renault Megane Scenic is its closest rival in terms of its concept and what it stands for, but looks nothing like this. The real clever point about the A-Class is its size. It's actually less in length than a Ford car and over a foot less than a Ford Fiesta, and that is no mean feat. But inside it has the space and comfort of a large family saloon, and it has the boot space of a small to medium size hatchback. Plus, all these passenger seats are removable, allowing you to have a very large load carrying area. Now, you could quite realistically compare the interior size of the A-Class with that of the C-Class and find very little difference. In fact, you'd have the impression of more space here in the A-Class because of the tall roofline and high seating position. There's a decent amount of space and legroom here in the rear, even for passengers like me, plus a very clever idea. I really like this, an integrated child seat. You press a button there, it pops back, locks into place, and what a neat idea that is. This model is the A160 Elegance, which is the most luxurious. Standard across the whole range are dual and side airbags, ABS, tinted glass, power steering, electric windows, and finally, a radio cassette. On the Elegance, you also get air conditioning, alloy wheels, and height-adjustable steering wheel. And as in most of the other Mercedes range, the choice of trim is Classic, Elegance, or Avant-Garde. There are 3 engines to choose from, a 1.4, 1.6 and 1.7 turbo diesel. This engine is the 1.6 and produces 102 brake horsepower from its 4-cylinder engine. 0 to 60 time takes 11 seconds and a top speed of 113 miles per hour with very good fuel economy. A figure of 39 to the gallon is quoted on the combined calculation, and the turbo diesel will give you 56 to the gallon. So, what about those other important safety features? Well, of course, there's ABS and brake assist, which works in emergency situations and helps the driver achieve maximum brake boost in a fraction of a second. ASR is a traction control system to stop wheel spin during acceleration. And finally, there's ESP, Electronic Stability Program, which unites all of the safety features, as well as reducing the risk of skidding and stabilising the car. It's ESP which was the critical addition to the A-Class, which has now made it so stable. The A-Class range comes, as you would expect, with a choice of 5-speed or automatic gearbox, plus what Mercedes describe as the best of both worlds, a 5-speed gearbox with an automatic clutch. What's that, you might think? You're confused, I can see. Well, so was I when the car first arrived at home the other day. I could see as I jumped in it was a 5-speed gearbox and went with my left foot to put on the clutch, only to find that there wasn't one. Took a bit of getting used to, I have to say. And now that you have mastered it, it's quite an easy gearbox to work with. You have to ease off the accelerator slightly, as you would do normally with a 5-speed gearbox and a clutch, to get smooth gear changes. And I quite like the idea of it. However, if you don't want the hassle of a clutch and a gearbox, I go for the automatic version anyway. Now, if you're used to driving largish 4x4 vehicles, you think that the A-Class will give you the same kind of superior safety feeling as those, well, for me personally, it doesn't. At times, it can feel slightly nervous with a bit of body roll, but you at least know that with all the electronic safety assistance in the car, you'll be okay. Prices for the A-Class start at £14,490 on the road for the A140 Classic. The A160 starts at £15,490, and the most expensive A-Class is the 170 turbo diesel at £17,890. We decided to take the Mercedes A-Class to a private airstrip and really put it through its paces and see how those safety features have come over in the new car. First of all, we put it through a series of high-speed corners. Then a slalom test. There was a brake test from 70 miles per hour, which made the Mercedes stop very, very quickly indeed. And as you can see, there seem to be no problems. The electronic aids really come into play when you push it hard, especially coming out of a corner and putting your foot down hard on the accelerator. So we all really like the style and design of the Mercedes A-Class. It has some wonderful features and touches on it. Just look at that louvered sunroof, for instance. So is it a super mini, an MPV, a hatchback, or a quality executive saloon? Well, perhaps it's all of those things, and perhaps it's none of those things. It really is unique. There is nothing else like it. So who would this car appeal to? Well, certainly a young couple with a family who wanted that famous pointed badge for quality and reliability on their vehicle. My retired next door neighbour absolutely loved it, and after I'd taken him out for a spin in it, went scampering off to our local Mercedes dealer, who no doubt told him to join the 15,000 other people in the queue who apparently want a Mercedes A-Class. So it's a car that attracts people from all ages and all walks of life, and that's perhaps exactly what Mercedes intended the A-Class to be for.
Coming up after the break, Richard Hammond takes a look at the new Legacy Outback and how at Stableford has news of Vauxhall's new Ecotech Diesel Engine.
It's quite difficult to place Subaru in any particular niche as a manufacturer. They've long been the farmer's friend. Their rugged estates and pickups, they're as much part of the pastoral scene as apple trees and global warming. But you're just as likely to see a Subaru being thrown violently at that self-same scenery by a rally driver, beloved as the Impreza is, of course, by rally drivers the world over. It could be said that picking on rally drivers and farmers is a bit limiting when it comes to selling large numbers of cars and making any money. But then again, if your numbers to sell are limited by artificial import restrictions anyway, it makes no difference. You can afford to be a bit specialist. Pitched against the Audi A6 Avant and BMW 5 Series in estate form, the new Subaru Legacy estate is exactly that, entirely new, designed from scratch. The floor pan and body all designed from scratch, with one purpose: to be the best handling load lugger on the market at any price. First thing you'll notice, an entirely new face and a much stronger face for it. And that's very deliberate. The Japanese designers said that they feel that is a generic weakness of Japanese cars, and I think it does give the car much more of an image. The external dimensions remain pretty much exactly the same, give or take a millimetre or two here and there. Any significant increase would have compromised the handling that this car's all about. But it is still an estate, and that boot space is enormous and surprisingly uncluttered. There's no turret intrusion from the suspension, and that's because of something called boomerang suspension. I don't know about boomerangs, but there are two things you do expect to find in any Subaru, and they are that horizontally opposed flat-4 boxer engine, in this case a 2.5 litre unit, pretty heavily reworked, doing its stuff up front, and the all-wheel drive system. In the case of the Subaru Legacy, it splits the power 50-50 between the front and rear. I think it's a slight bias towards the rear with the automatic version. And that is until things get a little bit tricky, in which case it'll then send the power and the torque to whichever axle is currently hanging on with any degree of grip. Subaru are proud of the fact that their four-wheel drive system is pretty simple, and it is, certainly compared to some of the big complex four-wheel drivers. That's partly because of the compact nature of the little boxer engine meant they've been able to optimise the layout, and they say that means there's less power lost along the drivetrain. However, if you do want to be complicated, there is a slightly more complicated option available to you, and that's got the simple name VDC. Okay, so you could say there's no shortage of all-wheel drive cars on the market, even with traction control as well. But Subaru say that their VDC, Variable Dynamic Control System, is a little bit different. It's fitted to some versions of the Subaru Legacy, and for a start it means that the torque is biased towards the rear. It's split 35-65 on cars with it fitted. That means it's going to have some of the characteristics of a rear driver, which means more fun. The car can be balanced and adjusted mid-corner on the throttle. It makes for a much more fun drive, but to reassure us, Uncle VDC is always there watching over to make sure if things get a little bit tricky, hopefully they can be sorted. There are sensors at each corner of the car. They can detect movement, they can detect sudden movement, even sudden steering input, G-forces from front to rear and side to side, constantly monitoring what's going on. And with all that information to hand, it means that VDC can step in and, if necessary, sort out the mess that you got everything into in the first place. There's a quality feel to the interior. It's pretty well equipped. We've got cruise control, automatic air conditioning with an economy mode, which is rather neat. Leather, obviously, on the steering wheel and seats. And the fit and finish is pretty good. The switches feel great. The switch gear is nicely integrated. There's a few nice touches. I like this chrome gate on the rather smart automatic gearbox. I also like this. It's the only car I've ever seen with a bear trap fitted as standard. But if you want something a little less executive and a little bit more rugged, then I think I might be able to help you there. Come here, I'm going to show you something a bit special. This is a one-off. I'm serious. This is probably the sexiest, maybe the horniest thing you're going to see this year. There are members of the farming community who can't sleep at night for thinking about this. If they do get to sleep, they have those odd, swirling, sweaty dreams and wake up with that funny feeling in the pit of the tummy that says, well, you know what it says. It's here. Look at this. Farmer's paradise. I'm not kidding. The Outback, if you're a farmer, is Naomi Campbell, Michelle Pfeiffer, an EU subsidy and a Norfolk Saddleback all rolled into one delightful package. It's an even more complex beast, if you like, than the previous car, because this strives to be the best handling estate on the road that can also go off the road a bit. Underneath, there's actually very little different about this car from the other one. It's the same basic package, but it's been put on these semi-off-road, chunky-ish tyres, raised a little tiny bit on its suspension, and it's got these butch and macho plastic side mouldings all over it. All in all, to a farmer, this is, well, sex on a stick, let's be absolutely honest. Subaru had sussed this years ago. Farmers have been buying Subarus for this reason for years. And basically, what they're saying is, your average 4x4 is too big, too bulky, and a lot of old rubbish on the road. This, they say, is the solution. Get a big practical estate car, raise it up a little bit, and for most uses, and face it, if farmers can put up with it, you and I probably can, it's fine. The Subaru Legacy and the Outback version go on sale in the UK in December. Prices aren't yet officially known, but the unofficial inside line is expect something like between 20 and 26,000, depending upon the trim level and the specification. Subaru don't expect to sell these in their millions in the UK. They can't get hold of them in that number anyway. But if it does nothing else, it raises one very good question. Surely it's as valid to take an on-road car and make it reasonably competent off-road as ever it is to take an off-road car and make that reasonably competent on-road.
One of the biggest areas advance in engine design is diesels. In the last 15 years or so, they've improved enormously from the slow, clattery things they used to be. And probably the most significant step forward recently has been in the field of direct injection diesels. The first to combine multi-valve cylinder heads with a small direct injection diesel engine are the engineers at Opel in Germany on their Ecotech TDI 16 valve. Manufacturers have been using 4 valves per cylinder for some time in petrol engines. They improve the fuel airflow within the cylinders to allow more efficient burning of the mixture. By combining this feature with direct injection technology, Vauxhall Opel have optimized the efficiency of their diesel engines. Currently in 2-litre form for the Vectra and Omega, and from the spring in 2.2-litre form for the Sintra, the new engines are at the forefront in emissions control, thanks to high injection pressure made possible by the new head design. Aided by an integrated platinum-coated oxidizing catalytic converter, the emissions are approximately 20% below the EU 96 standard. Emissions of nitrous oxide are reduced further due to 45% of the exhaust gas being recirculated to the combustion chambers through a special passage in the cylinder head. All this extra efficiency makes for improved performance over previous Opel diesel designs, to further reduce the image of diesels as being slow and cumbersome. There's also the added refinement of balance shafts on the Ecotech diesels fitted to the Omega and Sintra models. With VW in particular pushing the boundaries in recent diesel development, the Ecotech signals that Vauxhall Opel don't intend to be left behind. Overall, the new Ecotech diesel promises much, and we look forward to comparing it with older designs in a future programme.
Mercedes has bought Swatches, remaining 19% of the Smart Car City project. The Swiss watch company originally conceived the idea for a stylish, environmentally friendly city car, initially approaching VW before going into partnership with Mercedes-Benz. However, the project has been beset by problems. After the A-Class fell over during the infamous Elk test, Mercedes were horrified to discover that the Smart was prone to a similar problem. Frantically re-engineering the Smart so close to production meant that it's unlikely to ever return a profit. Now Swatch have pulled out of the project it inspired. The National Car Supermarket Group has gone into receivership with rumoured debts approaching £40 million. The company specialised in selling nearly new cars with very low mileages at discount prices, buying large amounts of stock at ex-fleet and manufacturer auctions before passing on the benefits to the customers. High turnover was the key. The idea proved popular with customers. With established car supermarkets in Northampton and Cannock, the group opened its latest branch in Manchester as recently as May of this year. At the time, the future of the group looked rosy to outside observers. Hundreds of customers who obviously had no warning of the National Car Supermarket collapse could find themselves with worthless warranties if their cash deposits were not processed through to the car care plan the company used to provide the service in time before NCS's assets were frozen. Next week on Motor Week, Ian Royle drives the Audi A6. Jeremy Taylor takes a look at the Alfa Romeo Spider, and we'll have a behind-the-scenes look at Morgan, one of Britain's cottage manufacturers, next week on Motor Week.